Does this life have meaning? Welcome back to Simple Mystic Podcast. My name's Nathan Roy. Let's get into some of life's essential questions. Hi, welcome back to the pod. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about words. I love words. I love stories. And many of you probably feel the same way. Everyone's got their favorite story. Maybe it's the story that their grandmother told them about their family coming to the United States and immigrating. Maybe it's a story about an epic fantasy world like Lord of the Rings or Chronicles of Narnia. Or maybe it's a different story. Maybe it's a story out of the Bible or out of Aesop's fables. Stories are at the heart of how we understand not only ourselves, but the world in which we live. I mean, it's a common trope in history that if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, or at least the more unsavory parts of it. And we really don't want to repeat those terrible moments in history, do we? We want to grow from them, learn from them. And in order to do that, we need to know what the story was. So what is story? When we really boil it down, when we peel back the layers of storytelling, what does it give us? It gives a sense of purpose and meaning because it conveys a few things. It conveys some truths that are deeper and, embedded into the very fabric of our life and the reality in which we perceive ourselves. Our stories are how we understand our place and understand where we're going and what's come before us. So what are some of those stories that are most important for us to know? Well, some of the most important stories are the ones that are directly related to who you and I actually are right now. So let's use a personal example. My family is mostly Irish. My great-great-grandparents immigrated to the United States during the Great Potato Famine, like many hundreds of thousands of individuals. And when they immigrated, they brought with them a whole family heritage of Ireland and a story of our family, where we came from and why we were where we were, why we were in the United States. And that story was handed down, parents to children and grandparents to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And without that story, I'm not who I am today. See, when I hear those stories from my family growing up, it allowed me to take ownership of a part of my culture that without the story I wouldn't have. I wouldn't know or appreciate things like Irish music, like the Celtic harp. I wouldn't understand or appreciate or maybe even enjoy things like cooked cabbage. You ever walk into a kitchen and smell cooked cabbage? It's got a strong scent to it. And there are many cultural foods that do that for families all over. Knowing that history, knowing that heritage paints a picture of who I am and gives me a sense of belonging. I'm part of something. I'm part of a group. I'm part of something that's bigger than just me. And we need those stories in order to feel that purpose, feel that connection, to have relationship with those in our lives. So that's one form of story, is our cultural heritage, our family. What about taking that a step further? What about our nation? The country you live in has a story. See, history is a story we all agree to tell ourselves. See, there's a lot of different perspectives on every history. I could ask my great-grandmother how things happened, but if I asked my great-grandfather, he might give me a slightly different story. My story is now a blending of the two. The same is true of our cultural history, our national history. If you have grown up in the United States, you heard the national story. You heard the history of the Revolution every year from basically second grade all the way through senior year of high school. For 10 straight years, you learned the same stories about the American Revolution, about Paul Revere, about the first shots at Lexington and Concord. You heard the story told from a certain lens. You heard about the Boston Massacre and the Tea Party, but you only heard it from one lens. You heard it from the colonial lens, from the Americans who were taxed but not given representation in British Parliament. That colors how we view the world. It shows us a reality in a very certain way. Picture for a second that same history of America, but told through a different lens. See, we're told the history of America through that colonial immigrant lens in traditional public schooling in the United States. But I was lucky enough that growing up, I lived for a portion of my life in northern Wisconsin. And there's a fair number of Native American tribes that live up there. The kids I went to high school with, they were Native American. They had a cultural heritage that was very different than mine. They didn't immigrate to the United States. They didn't immigrate to North America. They were here when my family showed up. And they had a different government structure, a different language, a whole different culture and way of living. Think about that story of American ingenuity and perseverance and bravery that we hear in the American Revolution, but think about it from the lens of somebody who was already here the whole time. And with each battle and fight, their people, their culture was stripped away, taken away. Now, there's many arguments and there's plenty of politics surrounding those issues, but I highlight that national perspective, that national history, to show a point, to show the point that your story, the one you choose to listen to and the one you choose to live your life by, has a great bearing on how you behave and the way you view other people, and maybe more importantly, treat them. So we've got our personal family histories, we've got our national stories that color how we view the country in which we live. Then we've got our various faith stories. See, these stories are different for different people. You know, maybe you're watching this because you're a Christian and you want to learn a little bit more about the Christian philosophy and Catholic theology. Or maybe you're listening to this because you just want to hear a different story. Maybe you grew up following Judaism or Islam or Buddhism, Hinduism. Those stories are different. Those faith stories tell a different story about the creation of the world and humans and what our purpose is. See, all those stories, those faith stories, they really surmount to, why are you here? What's the purpose for you existing? Many people increasingly don't have that third story. They have their family story, they have their nation story, and then they have their story of faith. My family gives me a grounding and a relationship, gives me something to tie my life to. I'm tethered to that family story. My nation story, my history of my country, it gives me a grounding and a basis for operating in the world and with other people of different languages and cultures and foods. My faith story helps me connect with all of mankind in a profoundly human and uniquely human way. It's not so much about what I look like or how I talk or what country I come from or what my family likes to make for dinner. My faith story is all about my person, me, Nathan. Why do I exist? And what is my purpose for being here? Does this life have meaning? That's what your faith story gives you. A purpose and a meaning behind why you live. And our modern culture, the reason why I really want to dive into storytelling and what those stories mean for our lives is increasingly so, all three of those important stories are being stripped away. More and more, we find ourselves fighting our family histories and our family cultures, or we're not passing them on. You know, I live in Chicagoland, and there's a great amount of Polish immigration that has come to Chicago in the last 150 years. And, you know, when I was a small kid, most of the kids I grew up with, they went to Polish school. They learned the language of the Polish people. They learned its history, and that was part of their schooling. It gave them that cultural identity. But now that people my age are having children, less and less people are choosing to send their kids to Polish school, as an example. So that cultural history is being lost. The next generation of kids are not learning that language, and they're not learning those cultural dishes and dances and practices. What happens when a whole people lose their cultural history? What becomes of us? What are we tethered to? What history do we have if that story is lost? Same is true of national stories. It becomes more and more with every passing week, it feels like, what this country did to that country, and who's right and who's wrong, and who's the bully and who's the victim. And those stories are used, those histories are manipulated by world leaders all over. They prey on whether or not you know this or the other thing about your history. So, where does that leave us? Well, if we choose to ignore our history, like the saying goes, it can be used against us. Now all of a sudden we go to war and we fight in the name, and we die in the name of a story that we don't actually know, or that maybe isn't even true. We might be fighting for some man or woman's story that they made up but said it was yours. So how can we take that story back? Bit by bit. We can study. We can look up those resources, because there were people that lived those lives and wrote those things down. So that's what we do. We read about the American Revolution, for example. We read about the history of what happened to the Native American tribes. And the more we consume what actually happened, the more we can actually create that real story. And maybe for each individual person, it might be a little bit different, but there will be a common thread, because some of those events are going to be in everyone's story. What about that third story? What about your faith? Your faith is something that gives you that existential purpose and meaning in life. And if, just like the other two stories, if I lose my family heritage, I become isolated. If I lose my national story, I become a person without a country. And if I lose my faith history, if I lose the story of Christianity, the story of Christ dying for my sins, the story of God coming into reality to save us from the fires of hell, if I lose that story, that great cosmic story, now I'm just living day to day. Now my life really does become nothing more than X's and O's, ones and zeros, punching in at work, feeding my body, and moving to the next thing. I don't know about you, but I love stories. And without them, I quite frankly would feel lost. Do you want to live in a story without purpose or meaning, without direction? Do you want to live a life stripped of cultural heritage, national identity, or faith and purpose? I don't know if I do. So we need to take it back. We need to bring our stories back to the forefront. That's what I'd like to leave you with, is how do we do that? See, everybody's got a unique set of words to tell. That's what stories are, after all. They're collections of words. And there's never been a single person on this planet that has heard the same words you've heard. See, we don't come up with words all on our own. They're taught to us through experience and through relationship. Every word you've ever uttered is one you either read or saw somewhere. You don't have the ability to speak a word that you've never known or heard or seen before. So your experience, your special, unique experience of the world, has gifted you a beautiful collection of words. In Old English, they used word hoard instead of vocabulary, which I think is way cooler. Word hoard makes me think of like ancient Vikings and treasure, which, how exciting is that? That's way better than vocabulary. I can't even tie that to a cool story. So let's use that word. What's your unique word hoard? Because see, God, He placed each of us on this planet. He has the power over life and death, which means He wants us to exist. He wants us to be alive. You and I are the only ones in all of human history that can say our unique word hoard. We're the only ones that can tell our story to the world. So I challenge you, and I challenge myself, to think about that unique collection of words, that special story that you can tell, that unique blend of your cultural heritage, your national identity, and your place, your role in the universe, that you are a son or a daughter of God. That means a tremendous amount. Without these stories and without us sharing them with each other, those identities are lost. Those meanings are lost. And I don't know about you, but I want to live a life of purpose. So share your story. Share your unique word hoard with the world so that it's not lost. God bless. We're going to start a new segment called Simple Questions. We want to keep the faith light and also deep. What should we get out of Mass? Well, I guess what we should get out of Mass is a profound sense of relationship, namely with God our Father, but also with each other. My mind, kind of shifts towards a couple moments in the Mass. First moment is a moment that a lot of people, in my experience at least, are nervous about. The sign of peace. Oh crap, my hands are sweaty. Father's about to say, give the sign of peace, but I don't want to shake someone's hand and get them all sweaty. That's gross. So I don't know about you, but I get sweaty hands. So I'm furiously wiping them on my pants because I want to shake someone's hand. So relationship with each other is the first. And it's really, that's one of the big moments, is the sign of peace. To let go of the things that make us nervous and make us self-conscious, but to just be in relationship with somebody. True relationship is all about not judging each other. Does my wife care if I have sweaty palms? Sure, she might tease me about it, but it doesn't affect our relationship. I should have the same feeling. We should have the same feeling when we go to Mass. The second part is the part in the Mass where we're supposed to bow down, and we say, just before we go up for communion, we say the words, Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed. I always reflect on my relationship with Christ at that moment, really strongly, or I think we should anyway, because it's all about the things that I messed up on, and how really it's up to him to forgive me. And that's the core part of the Mass, isn't it? It's us being in relationship with each other, and then first and foremost, reconciling our life, connecting with God. What should we pray about? Everything? Prayer is not just about the big things. Prayer is about connecting with another human being in an intimate way. Sharing all of our life with God is what he asks of us. That's what he wants us to do. So yeah, go to him when, you're about to get married or you're going for an interview at a big job, and ask him to guide you and direct your steps. It doesn't have to be with flowery language or with fancy prayers, but just simply asking him. But don't limit yourself to just the big things in life. Sometimes it's just, thank you, God, for letting me wake up and breathe today. Be with me as I drink this cup of coffee. Now, that's way easier said than done. We get distracted by all the stuff in our lives, but prayer is about, as St. Paul says, praying ceaselessly, giving all of our life over to him. That doesn't mean every word of prayer is, every word of our life is devoted to praying to God, but to dedicate all of our day to him at various points. How often do you go to God for simple things versus just the big things? What should I read the Bible for? Why does it even matter? It's a great question. A lot of people use the Bible for a bunch of different things. They think it's a history book, or they use it to understand, scientifically how the universe was created. That's not the point of the Bible. The point of the Bible is to share the reality that humanity has gone through, and that there is a line of salvation. There's a pathway to grace and heaven, eternal bliss. So what is that story? Why should you read the Bible? What should you read it for anyway? You should read it for that story. You should read it to recognize that mankind was at once in perfect communion with God, walking hand in hand with the creator of the entire universe, walking with him in a garden, blissfully happy. But we decided that we'd rather decide what is right and what is wrong for ourselves, rather than just listening to God, who is all-knowing. Can't be wrong. We decided we got this. And then the Bible continues that story, because if God really is truly good and truly amazing, he wouldn't have given up on us. And he didn't. The story continues all the way to Jesus Christ, who took on human flesh to live the same life you and I do, so that through him, by following him, we can enter heaven. You should read the Bible so that you can know that story. Know that you are in the story right now. Why do I go to Mass? Apart from the obvious, like Jesus told me to do it, like that's what Keep Holy the Sabbath Day is. Like, here's a commandment, do this thing, don't do these things. That's the easy answer. And it's like, I want to do the things that God said to do. But I have 4 kids. My kids are all under 8 years old. And when I was maybe 15, all the way until I got married at 26, I had no earthly desire or ever even thought it was possible that I would someday be in charge of raising other humans. I didn't think that I was going to have to show somebody else what it meant to be a moral, upstanding person. I didn't think that that was ever going to be in the cards for me. But once I had kids, and even before I had kids, when I got married to my wonderful wife, it became very, very clear to me that my life was no longer my own. It was hers. And all my, joys and triumphs were hers, but so were all my faults and all my shortcomings. And so after getting married, I really took it on myself, like consciously, like I need to be better for her. And then later on, for my kids. And Mass is really what helps re-center me and be a better person. I used to go to Mass just for me, and that was okay, but it didn't strengthen me, if I'm being honest, quite the same way it did when others were under my care and responsibility. So if I was being brutally honest, why do I go to Mass now? It's 1, because God told me I should do it, and I don't want to disobey him. But 2, because I want to be the best possible husband and father I can be. And Mass gives me the blueprint for that. Why do I surrender my will to God? I'd love to say that I do it all the time. See, if I did it all the time, then I would essentially be saying I don't sin, which would be ridiculous. I wish. I try very hard to surrender my will to God, but I'm tempted, just like everybody else, to do things that are in my own self-interest and not in the interest of others. God tells me that I should live my life for other people and solely for other people, like not with any regards for my own well-being. I should really be caring and loving others. And I try to do that, but sometimes, I don't want to. I want to watch the football game rather than give the care and attention to my children that I know I ought to do. So why do I surrender my will? Well, because I know it's right. I know that all of those moments where I choose myself over other people, I know that choosing myself is selfish. And how am I ever going to help make a better world if all I'm doing is caring about me? The only way to make a better world, and that's really ultimately what I would like to do, is play a small part in that. The only way I can do that is by letting go of me and living for you. Why do I love Jesus, even though I've never seen him? That's a tough one. I love people even when I don't see them. Maybe you do too. I would hope that you do. See, I love my wife, but I know her way more now than I did when I first met her. See, love is a choice, not a feeling, and maybe that's the confusion that we have is we think of love as passion and desire, but those aren't love, right? I love when I put that person's goodwill before my own, when I put that person's best interest before my own. So why do I love Jesus? Because of what he did for me. Like historically, we know he existed. We know what he did. And through Christian tradition, we know the story of what came after. We know, and I think there's very, very good evidence that we know empirically, like what happened after is also true. I mean, what if I were to tell you that the first 50 years after Jesus died and came back to life, all of the apostles, apart from John, were brutally tortured and murdered? At no point, none of them said, actually, never mind, we just made it up. I don't know about you, but unless they were way tougher than we are today, I don't know how strong I would be in the face of torture and death for my spiritual beliefs. I'd love to believe that I would be. So why do I love Jesus? Because I believe what he said is true. I believe him when he said that I am the way and the truth and the life. I am the Son. I believe him when he says that. And if he's true, if what he said is real, C.S. Lewis's trilemma tells us our answer, right? He claimed to be God. So either he's crazy, in which case I'm not following him, or he's a liar. He knows he's not God. He's just telling me a lie. Well, I'm also not following that guy. Well, that only leaves a third option. Logically speaking, he is who he says he is. And if he created all that is, and he suffered on a cross and died for my sins so that I could enter heaven, shouldn't I follow what he says instead of what I say? If you found that clip helpful in any way for your spiritual life, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel so that others might be helped in the same way.